priorities from communities of color. It's just an incredible panel we just had, and I was just going to say, I'm just listening to everybody. I'll have to hear it. I hear the whole thing. We're just going to go in the order that is listed up there. I'm going to say a few sentences about our speakers, and then I'm going to let them introduce themselves more, and then we'll present the order that's also listed up there. Tommy Chesbro is a certified sexual educator with the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. He's given something like over 2,000 workshops, so he's going to tell us more about this in a minute. Shanna from Heap-of-Birds is a Navajo scholar that lectures nationally and internationally and also teaches here at OU at the Native Studies program. I'll also more later also. And Omare Ogisi is an Oklahoma Health Equity Initiative, works with them, and she also wears a lot of hats, so she's going to tell us a little bit more about herself also. And I am Roksana, Alavi, and I teach a Women and Gender Studies program, and also the Liberal Studies program, and I'm back home actually. This is OU is home, so I should say Oklahoma is home, and I've been gone and just came back, so it's good to be back here again. Well, my talk today, if I can manage to pull this off.
Dr. Alavi, can you speak up, please?
Yes. No one's ever told me that before. Chill.
I think you have to turn the orange one on the side. Right here, we'll try here.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. I was listening to the last panel, and I thought, you know, everybody is talked to Lynn. I'm glad I talked to Lynn yesterday about this because she wasn't change it. However, about a month ago, Caitlin said, the organizer, actually said, you know, in her calm way of talking, like, is she here? And she said, Caitlin said, I'm really interested to see if you're going to talk about your community or your research. I was like, oh, my community. And I thought, I don't ever talk about my community. I don't even know how to talk about my community. That makes me nervous think about talking about my community. My research, I'm Iranian. I'm actually Iranian. I was I'm Iranian American, but I'm actually an immigrant. So I'm Iranian, and I thought, but my research is on Hispanic community. And so I thought, talk about the Iranian. I mean, just standing here telling you that I want to talk about the Iranian community makes me nervous because we don't talk about ourselves. At least not in the way that I want to talk about it. So I thought, you know, I appreciate it. I appreciate that Caitlin actually brought that up because I would have never actually thought about talking about the Iranian community. When I was finishing up my PhD, my director actually said, you know, you're writing about race and oppression, you really should write about Iranian community. And I moved to South Texas and I thought, no way, I can't. That's just a little too much to deal with for me. No, so I wrote on the Hispanic community now in South. So I'm presenting, you know, I'm sitting here going, what am I going to say? So I'm going to kind of, you know, I was like, oh, I have a PowerPoint because that's just my security blanket. I can actually manage to go, okay, here, make it intellectual so I don't have to connect to it too much. So being Iranian American is a kind of a contradiction in a kind of a self-identity. In one hand, we're like proud of our culture, our heritage, our history. We go on and on. We love Nowruz, by the way, which is the Iranian New Year that's coming up next month. We celebrate the first day of spring. And we love our families beyond words. I'll tell you more about that. Well, I should say most of the time. As a matter of fact, I brought one here with me today. My cousin. She'll be in the panel a little bit later today. But at the same time, naturally, well, at least for most of us here, we'll probably agree, we're also embarrassed to be affiliated with the Iranian government today. So here's the contradiction. We love to show those who don't know about our food, our culture, our rugs. You know, we like to blend in, but at the same time, we want to be noticed, that we're here and we're doing good work. We're not those people. So it is, I suppose, the kind of a history of every immigrant community. And like I said, I'm one of them. I'm a first generation. I moved to the United States back when I was 15, about 23 years ago. And so, Iranian population are actually one of the first, she's a Middle Eastern community, is one of the first immigrants in the, newest immigrants to the United States. So here is, we've talked about this. So here I want to talk about challenges of organizing in the Iranian community. So First of all, is like we develop extremely tight family, emotional ties to our family, for better or worse, because at the same time, these are traditional communities. So we don't talk about reproductive rights. We don't talk about sexuality. We don't talk about birth control. We don't talk about being raped. We don't talk about child sexual abuse. We don't talk about anything that really affects women, because it's a kind of an embarrassment. So we live in this really strange area. So all of this stuff, we don't date. We're not supposed to date till we get, we just find someone for us, or we just kind of have dinner a couple times, and then next thing you know, we're getting married to a stranger. So at the same time, so there's all of, but at the same time, this family that is so, in so many ways, oppressive and closing, at the same time, extraordinarily supportive. So you always know you have a mountain of people behind you. So if you were at the steakhouse last night, which is really ironic, I'm a vegetarian. My family, we had a birthday, and there's 25 of us at the dinner. We're like every restaurant nightmare in Oklahoma. None of us can, there was like 5 people, like normal people, like all 25 of us like, let's go have dinner. And we're all over there. So at the same, so that's extraordinary. There's nothing you can do, or you cannot do with that kind of support in your life. However, at the same time, we have this huge generation gap, right? So we already deal with this stuff. The generation, every generation pushes the envelope a little further than the one before. Now imagine being an immigrant, and you're going to a whole new culture. You're going to a place that the moral values are so much different. So there is this whole gap that we're trying to fill here that you have to address if you're working in the communities that you see. Really, any traditional cultures, especially if you're dealing with cultures from the Middle East, maybe from Iran. So, and I told you this, we were told we're not supposed to be sexual. No, if we become pregnant, our families are probably going to disown us. And it does happen, as a matter of fact, in the community. But there are also other challenges, which is actually being involved and doing this kind of work in a predominantly white space, which is cultural. Language barriers. Yesterday, Lynn was actually in my class yesterday. She was grateful to give a talk in my class for my students, and she actually asked them, I don't want to share this, Lynn. She asked them yesterday to introduce themselves first in their original language, if there is another language. And I thought, Lynn, that was really interesting. Why did you do that? She's like, well, the way that people present themselves in their first language, they're more confident. So when you hear them first introduce themselves in whatever language they're more familiar with, is you see more confidence. And then you see them transform and start to in English, it doesn't come out quite as confident as confidence. So here, I'm in the talk with my cousin, I'm talking to her yesterday, and she said, that she told me exactly that about her mom, which is my aunt. She said that, it's really ironic, my aunt is this really confident, amazing woman, and she's a matriarch of the family, by the way. And she, and then you watch her speak English, and it's like, she's like a totally different person. It's like, who is this woman? So it's really interesting to acknowledge that when we're working in the communities of color. And it's not just language, it's because, of course, language is connected to culture. Those of us who work in identity politics, we know that, I talk differently if I'm speaking in Farsi than if I'm standing here speaking in English. The way I introduce myself, if I introduce myself as Roksana Alavi, it's really different than if I introduce myself as Roksana, which is how we say it in Farsi. So it's my demeanor changes, the way I react to people, the way I talk to people changes. So here's another thing Mona brought to my attention, which is that we're conspiracy theorists. So if you're nice to me, I want to know why. Because you're just nice, If you're trying to teach me something, I want to know why. What are you trying to take away from me? Why are you trying to teach me? Are you trying to teach me about reproductive rights so that you can steal my child and enculturate it into Western culture? So we can't. It's like we have this lack of trust in people. And so when we're working again with the communities of the Iranian or maybe more traditional communities, we have to keep that in mind that there is going to be this issue of trust. We don't even trust other Iranians, nonetheless, who don't even speak our own language. So again, there is this barrier, this bridge needs to be connected, needs to be made. And again, we worry. I have my youngest brother is 28 years old, 27 years old, and he is probably the most individualist in of us 3 siblings. I was 50 when we moved here, so I was enculturated a little more. He's a lot more individualistic, which I totally admire that. But at the same time, my mother is completely dumbfounded. She's like, why did we go home with him? Why does he not want to be with us every single weekend? Mom. You know, I was expected to go. I lived in Walker Tower, just a block north of this building, my freshman year. My zoology lab, and then at 4:30, I was expected to be home by 6 o'clock. Give me enough time to get home, get my stuff from the dorms, get my laundry, drive to Oklahoma City. And if I went to dinner at the Couch Cafeteria, which is also right about here, my mom was all kind of out of shape by the time I got home. So again, there is that fear that we're going to lose the little we have left of Iran. Just this little tip that's left, because what's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to our culture? What's going to happen to our youth? What's going to happen to all the thousands of history we're so proud of? Nothing. It's going to dissolve into nothingness if we're not careful. So we have to acknowledge that. We have to make sure that when we organize in the community, that we actually have this, that we can take that fear away in a way. So then we fear the stereotypes against us. So now organizing itself, being white is also scary, because you know, it just is. You know, it's just you making noise, you're still waters. But imagine being from Iran and trying to organize, which I got this in my Facebook yesterday. I think that's really funny. The one here on that side says this is where people think I live. Next one says what people think I drive. People think this is what my house looks like, and this is what I look like. When people say from people of Iran, this is kind of what they think. Well, when I look down, well, not all of us drive those cars and live in those houses, I have to admit. But, you know, the one actual, that's an actual picture of the capital city. So I thought, you know, this is the kind of thing we fear, well, the one on the top at least. So, you know, here in a recent study, and I'm running out of time. Here in a recent study showed that people become sexually active in about the age of 17. Well, you know, among those Iranian teenagers here in America. So what we have to do, we have to get the message out to them. We have to let them know that, because some of the barriers to family planning is lack of support. And remember, we don't even talk about this. My mom told me yesterday, we thought only bad girls got menstrual cycles when they were little, because we don't even know what that is. Just one day you just look down and you go, oh my God, what's happening to my body? So if somebody was strange enough to tell you, they're just like, okay, this is just the bad girls. So the girls who do things they're not supposed to do. So what's the solution? I think the solution is culturally sensitive dialogue and training. I think we got to be able to talk to our kids about all of those things. We got to be able, and I don't know, it's not going to happen for the most part in their homes. So what we have to do, and this is one of those things about giving knowledge about reproductive rights to all communities. When I was going to talk about this about South Texas, because I'm not a Hispanic population, and when I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap up in a minute. But when I talked to some students, some teachers in schools, like, yeah, we have actual sex education in schools, but we have to have parents' permission to have their kids in it, and nobody signs up. We have, like, at a class of 30 or 40, we might have 2 parents who say, yeah, the kids can go in there. Well, where else are they going to get the information from? So I think that's really important to acknowledge that, and thank you so much. We're just going to go in order.
Osio tohinjon Tommy Chesbro dawa dawa ji jalagi usti jimoni jalagi ale lambi ale ganage ale yone. My name is Tommy Chesbro. I am Cherokee and Lumbee. I'm mixed race. I'm also Caucasian and African American. So if you see this white boy up here, now you know why I'm on the secret color. I am also a two-spirited person, or gay. I've been living with HIV since I was 25 years old. I'm now 51, almost 52, so 26 years. There's so much I've heard this morning and yesterday that I would love to talk about that we're just not going to have time to get into. But a lot of points were brought up earlier about the connection between oppression of all of our populations and how we need to work together. And that's sort of my personal story, how that got involved, because of myself working with the HIV-infected community, with the LGBTQ community, with the Native community, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But the reason I was asked was primarily to talk about my work with the Native community. One of the things that, if you're going to be doing advocacy work with the Native community, is to understand that there is a huge diversity among natives across the United States. There is not a generic Indian. We're not all alike. Look at Shanna and I sitting next together. You know, we don't look anything alike, right? And but also, you know, different regions of the country have different tribal cultures. There is right now, you know, people think of Native Americans, the first thing that comes to mind is the reservations and living in rural areas. But close to 70% of Native people in the United States right now live in an urban setting. So most natives are not on the reservation or in a rural setting. But then we've got populations who still live on reservations and then people who live in rural settings. Oklahoma is not a reservation state, contrary to what a lot of people think. So there is differences there as well. When the missionaries came and started converting us to Christianity, different groups and different denominations were in charge in different areas of the country to do that. So there's multiple denominations among Christianity among Native peoples, depending on where in the country you are. Some are dominated by the Catholic religion, some by Protestant religions, and so on. So even within the Protestant religion, different denominations within the Protestant religion. We have still a large population that really practice traditional ceremonies and traditional religion. And then we have those individuals who try to incorporate both. And the other thing that if you're going to work in the Native community is to understand that our community is brought up really the issue of trust. And the Native community is going to be that way too. If you come into them as a non-member of the community and wanting to help, they're going to want to know why. You know, why do you want to help? Are you doing this for yourself or your own benefit, or do you really care about us? Because the Native community is used to people coming in and saying, let me do this research on your community, it's going to help do this. We're going to find out all this information. And then those researchers turn around and leave and never come back. And they publish some article, and it ends up not helping the community. So trust is very important to gain when you're going to work in this community. Even if you're Native American and you're coming to a new community or a member of a different tribe, you have different tribal practices, you're going to have to establish that trust, even if you're still a Native person. So when you're coming in to work with Native people, it's really important to find someone within that community that you can establish a relationship who has the ability then to introduce you to the community. And then even after that, that's going to give you a little bit of credibility. But they're going to watch you. And they're going to watch you and see what your actions are, see if you're respectful, see if you're really willing to learn about their culture and their practices. They're going to want to see, are you going to incorporate yourself into the community? Are you going to come to our kids' softball games? Are you going to come to the green onion and wild onion and egg dinner, next weekend? Are you going to are you going to attend this ceremony, this feast that we're having? They're going to see if you're going to incorporate yourself as part of the community. And that means a lot when you do that. And so you've got to establish that trust. And once you do, and you've become basically adopted into the community, you're going to be able to do a lot more work, a lot better work, a lot more effective work than you're going to be as someone who is considered an outsider. And that takes time, and it takes a commitment. And I think most of you, a lot of you are committed to this work, but when you're going to want to find your niche, where you fit in. Where's the place where you really want to be to make a difference? Oh, sorry, 5 minutes? I didn't know enough time. So let me rewind quickly. The Native community, why would somebody want to work in this community? We have very high STI rates, sexually transmitted infection rates, some of the highest in the country. We have high HIV infection rates. Currently, we have the 3rd highest rate of HIV infection in the United States. African American, Hispanic, and then Native American. Numerous health disparities, from heart disease to diabetes and so on. poor health outcomes, high infant mortality rates, high incarceration rates, and we've already seen presentations related to the incarceration issue and so on and so forth. So you know, there's a need, but and some of that is related to a lot of historical trauma that has occurred among our people. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term historical trauma, but basically what that is the things that happened to our communities 200 years ago still affect people today and affect their health outcomes today. And so there's a lot of that going on. We could do a whole lecture on historical trauma, so I won't go there. But so those are some of the things that I think are important to know when wanting to work with the Native community. But I didn't talk to Lynn, but after listening to what the first panel did and what I've heard, I wanted to share just a tiny bit, and I'll take the rest of my time to talk about how I got into this work. I was infected in 1985 with HIV, and at that time was working on a master's degree in performing arts and musical theater. And at that time, I didn't think I was going to live. I tried to go back to school. I dropped out of school because I just couldn't take it. A couple of years later, I decided that I wanted to try to make a difference in the community, so I started working doing HIV advocacy. And to this day, we talk about criminalization process. There's a whole idea that's going on right now, and there's still an issue of criminalization of HIV, which is a whole other topic that we can talk about that's related to this issue as well. But then after starting working in the HIV prevention community, I was always wanted to work in my Native community, and I had the opportunity. I first started working in the State Health Department in Oklahoma in the HIV STD service. And then I was able to start to work at the Urban Indian Clinic in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and ran their HIV prevention program for 10 years. And during that time, became the Assistant Director of Health Education while I was there, Health Education and Wellness. And we started a Two-Spirit organization, and that's a whole other topic we'll be talking about. But Two-Spirit relates to other gendered identities within the many Native communities around the United States. It's a modern term. Not all tribes like to use that word itself. There are specific names among tribal populations related to those other genders and so on. But we started this group while I was there, and it's still going on today. And now there's multiple groups all across the United States of Two-Spirit societies around the United States. I worked there for, like I said, 10 years, and then went back and got a master's degree in human relations from the University of Oklahoma. And so now I have my master's degree and got a position as Vice President of Education for Planned Parenthood of Arkansas and Eastern Oklahoma, which is now part of Planned Parenthood of the Heartland. But I'm no longer with them. I started my own consulting company because I wanted to be involved with this work. And so now I do consulting around the country with different agencies with federal funds. I do work on teen pregnancy prevention. I'm a consultant with for tribal grantees who receive federal funding to do the PrEP, Personal Responsibility Education Program for teen pregnancy prevention. I work with an Indian Health Service contract that is trying to develop messaging, HIV prevention messaging for Native Americans who are LGBTQ or Two-Spirit identified. I work with an Office of Minority Health contract that is I'm helping produce 2 videos, HIV prevention videos and stigma reduction videos for providers who work in the Native American community. And then I have a contract with the AAP, the Abortion Access Project. And so I'm incorporating all those things in my life that I have an interest in, and they overlap each other. And we've talked about today that importance of how we try to work together in all these issues, because if we can come together with one voice, we can make a bigger difference. And I'll stop.
Shanna, Heap-of-Birds. And I'm Navajo, as Roksana mentioned earlier. I teach in the Native American Studies Department, and I'm currently teaching a class on gender and sexuality in Native North America. I have a paper here that I'm going to read, and I'll hopefully do it under 12 minutes. The title of my paper is Reclaiming Indigenous Lifeways, Native Women in Power in the 21st Century. In a well-known article published in the winter of 1980, Cherokee scholar Raina Green examined more than 350 bibliographic items on Native American women dating from the 17th century onward, which left her with the conviction that Native women have neither been neglected nor forgotten. Instead, Green writes that our picture of how Native American women live and function from the cradle to the grave lacks not only clarity, but also a realistic basis. This is mainly because of a plethora of scholarly work published that has been selective, stereotyped, and damaging, which of course, as most studies of women turn out to be. To her credit, Green is right in saying that given American scholars' almost pathological attachment to Indian wars, horsemen of the plains, and the end of the trail chiefs, I suppose we should be grateful that anything at all has been written about Native American women. However, one interesting aspect of her study was her interpretation of the literature within the context of feminist thought with regard to works published in the 60s and 70s. Green contends that a feminist rhetorical consciousness is shared by both Indian women and scholars, but it never goes beyond that. In fact, Green doubts that feminist theory of any stripe would be well received on any reservation, given the hostile climate for discussion of any theory applied to Indians. Green explains, and I quote, "For Indian feminists, every woman's issue is framed in the larger context of Native American people. The concerns which characterize debate in Indian countries, such as tribal sovereignty and self-determination, put Native American tribes on a collision path with regulations like Title IX and with equal opportunity and affirmative action. Tribes insist that treaty-based sovereignty supersedes any other federal mandate. While many Native American women have personal difficulty with the application of tribal sovereignty to affirmative action and tribal hiring, most agree that sovereignty is best debated without special exception. Other discussions about issues important to Indian women, such as better health care or the need for professional training, are always rooted in debate over the issues most germane to Indian people, which are the land, natural resources, water rights, and treaty guarantees. The ironies multiply when, contrary to standard feminist calls for revolution and change, Indian women insist on taking their traditional places as healers, legal specialists, and tribal governors. Their call is for a return to Native American forms, which they insist involve men and women in complementary mutual roles. I underscore these differences because they may teach us more than analyses of Indian female oppression. I am not suggesting that a return to tradition in all forms is correct, but that attention to the debate about the implications of such re-traditionalization would mean healthier, culturally more appropriate scholarship on Indian women. In addition, I would like to address the recent work of another Cherokee scholar named Andrea Smith, who is currently an associate professor at UC Santa Cruz and co-founder of Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. In her article titled Beyond Pro-Choice versus Pro-Life, Women of Color and Reproductive Justice, Smith informally interviewed Native women about their position on abortion. She asked them, "Are you pro-life or pro-choice?" And she quickly found that their responses did not neatly fit within those media-mandated categories. Instead, one respondent that claimed she was pro-life also thought abortion should not be illegal, that women should have one if they want, and that federal funding should be available so that anyone can afford to have one. And although another respondent claimed she was pro-choice, she also added that the most important thing to her was promoting life in Native communities. What becomes increasingly clear when reading Smith's article is the fact that instead of trying to situate her respondents into either camp, It was more useful for her to recognize the limitations of the pro-life, pro-choice dichotomy for understanding the politics around reproductive justice. She explains that unlike pro-life versus pro-choice advocates who make their overall political goal either the criminalization or decriminalization of abortion, the reproductive frameworks these Native women are implicitly articulating are based on fighting for life and self-determination of their communities. The criminalization of abortion may or may not be a strategy for pursuing that goal. Furthermore, Smith states that while both camps of the pro-choice and pro-life debate give lip service to addressing the concerns of women of color, in the end, the manner in which both articulate the issues at stake contributes to their support of political positions that are racist and sexist, and which do nothing to support either life or real choice for women of color. Instead, women of color activists should develop alternative paradigms for articulating reproductive justice that makes critiques of capitalism and criminalization central to the analysis rather than simply expand either pro-life or pro-choice frameworks. For instance, increasingly poor women and women of color are finding their pregnancies criminalized, as we heard in the previous session. As Dorothy Roberts found and others have noted, women of color are more likely to be arrested and imprisoned for drug use, because as a result of greater rates of poverty in communities of color, they are more likely to be in contact with government agencies where their drug use can be detected. Roberts critiques communities of colors for often supporting the criminalization of women of color who have addictions and for failing to understand this criminalization as another strategy of white supremacy that blames women for the effects of poverty and racism. Other scholars have noted that a simple choice perspective is not effective for addressing this problem because certain women become marked as women who make bad choices and hence deserve imprisonment. Similarly, very important Native scholar Elizabeth Cook Lynn argued in her article about the Big Pipe case that at the same time Native peoples in the Dakotas were rallying around notable AIM leader Leonard Peltier, no one stood behind a woman named Marie Big Pipe when she was incarcerated on a felony charge of assault with intent to commit serious bodily harm because she breastfed her child while under the influence of alcohol. She was denied services to treat her substance abuse problem and access to abortion services when she became pregnant. But not only did her community not support her, it supported her incarceration. Cook Lynn argues that in doing so, the community supported the encroachment of U.S. federal jurisdiction on tribal lands for an issue that would normally be under tribal jurisdiction. Cook Lynn recounts how this demonization of Native women was assisted by the publication of Michael Doris's book of 1989 titled The Broken Cord, which narrates his adoption of a Native child who suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome. While this book has been crucial in sensitizing many communities to the realities of fetal alcohol syndrome, it also portrays the mother of the child unsympathetically and advocates repressive legislative solutions targeted against women's substance abusers. Thus, within Native communities, the growing demonization of Native women's substance abusers has prompted tribes to collude with the federal government in whittling away their own sovereignty. In fact, criminal justice responses to unwanted pregnancies and/or pregnant women who have addiction issues demonstrate an inherent contradiction in the pro-life position. As Smith points out, many pro-life organizations have been ardent opponents of population control programs and policies advocating against the promotion of dangerous contraceptives or the promotion of sterilization in third world countries. Yet their position depends on the prison industrial complex that is an institution of population control for communities of color in the United States. According to Smith, a connection can be made with the critical history of the failure of the prison system to deal effectively with social problems. And this is a view supported by Angela Davis's book titled Are Prisons Obsolete, as one student mentioned earlier. This is because criminalization individualizes solutions to problems that are the result of larger economic, social, and political conditions. Consequently, it is inherently incapable of solving social problems or addressing crime. Alternative social formations and institutions that can speak to these large-scale political and economic conditions are the appropriate place to address social issues such as reproductive justice. Furthermore, in the pro-choice arena, Native women do not fare well in that either. In fact, this narrow approach has contributed to some pro-choice organizations, such as Planned Parenthood and the National Abortion and Reproductive Rights Action League, often developing strategies that marginalize women of color. Both supported the Freedom of Choice Act in the early 90s that retained the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment, besides discriminating against poor women by denying federal funding for abortion services, discriminates against American Indian women who largely obtain health care through the Indian Health Services, a federal agency. One of NARAL's petitions stated, "The Freedom of Choice Act will secure the original vision of Roe v. Wade, giving all women reproductive freedom and securing that right for future generations. But apparently, poor women and indigenous women do not qualify as women." Toward the end of her article, Smith recounts a story that takes place at a meeting of the United Council of Tribes in Chicago, in which representatives from the Chicago Pro-Choice Alliance informed the attendees that they should join the struggle to keep abortion legal, or else they would lose their reproductive rights. A Native woman in the audience responded, "Who cares about reproductive rights? We don't have any rights, period." Smith explains that what her response suggests is that a reproductive justice agenda must make the dismantling of capitalism, white supremacy, and colonialism central to its agenda, and not just as principles added to organizations' promotional material designed to appeal to women of color, with no budget to support making these principles a reality. Smith says that we must reject single-issue pro-choice politics of the mainstream reproductive rights movement as an agenda that not only does not serve women of color, but actually promotes the structures of oppression which keep women of color from having real choices or healthy lives. I just want to add one more thing that will address my initial title in the idea of returning to traditionalism among Native tribes, particularly because I come from a traditional community that is in a rural area, one of the most rural areas in the United States. And it's from a book written by Paula Gunn Allen, who is a very important Laguna Pueblo scholar, who wrote a title in 1986 titled, "Who is Your Mother? Red Roots of White Feminism." She reiterates what I've been told by my own elders and echoes the thoughts I related by Rena Green at the beginning of my talk here today. Allen says, contemporary Indian communities value individual members who are deeply connected to the traditional ways of their people, even after centuries of concerted and brutal effort on the part of the American government, the churches, and the corporate system to break the connections between individuals and their tribal world. In fact, in the view of the traditionalists, a rejection of one's culture, one's tradition, language, or people is the result of colonial oppression and is hardly to be applauded. They believe that the roots of oppression are to be found in the loss of tradition and memory, because that loss is always accompanied by a loss of positive sense of self. In short, Indians think it is important to remember, while Americans believe it is important to forget. Some things to remember or learn about the central tenets of American Indian thought deal with the value placed on the female person. For one thing, there are many female gods recognized and honored by the tribes and nation. Femaleness was highly valued, both respected and feared, and all social institutions reflected this attitude. Even modern-day sayings, such as the Cheyenne statement that a people is not conquered until the hearts of the women are on the ground, express the Indians' understanding that without the power of women, the people will not live, but with that, they will endure and prosper. Indians did not confine this belief in the central importance of female energy to matters of worship. Among many of the tribes, perhaps 70% or more in North America alone, this belief was reflected in all of their social institutions. In fact, as Ellen reminds us in this generation, the vision that impels feminists to action was the vision of the grandmother society, the society that was captured in the words of the 16th century explorer Peter Martyr nearly 500 years ago. It is the same vision repeated over and over by radical thinkers of Europe and America, who basically tell of a country where there are no soldiers, no police, no nobles, no kings, regents, prefects, or judges, no prisons, no lawsuits. All are equal and free. In fact, Allen says, I think this is the reason traditionals say we must remember our origins, our cultures, our histories, our mothers and grandmothers. For without that memory, which implies continuance rather than nostalgia, we are doomed to engulfment by a paradigm that is fundamentally inimical to the vitality, autonomy, and self-empowerment essential for satisfying high-quality life among Native American women. Thank you.
So I'm Omare, Ogisi, and I work with the Abortion Access Project. And so one night I'm sitting at home and this commercial comes on TV and it starts listing all of these causes of death, and then bam, in your face, abortion is the #1 killer of African Americans. I'm like, are you kidding me? Well, a couple weeks after that, I also oversee a youth program, and one of my teens posts this on her Facebook page. I'm like, are you kidding me? People actually believe this commercial? And I guess so, and so it prompted me to do some more research behind the people who actually put this commercial out. And what I've started to learn is the pro-life movement is actually using our history against us. And this is crazy, but it has gotten a lot of buy-in from my community. And although my appearance may be a little different, I am African American. I like to brag that I'm truly African American because my father is from Nigeria. So when they made that term up, they were thinking of me. So, I mean, and last week I watched a documentary that was horrific. I actually was intrigued by it at first because it was about the Holocaust, so I thought. And it drew me in because it made me angry that people younger don't know about the Holocaust. And as I continue to watch it, I'm not going to name what it is, but for those of you that have seen it, it's terrible. It was an anti-abortion documentary, and it tricked these people into thinking that because they believed that the Holocaust was bad, that now they should also believe that abortion is bad. Totally wrong. But they're taking that and they're using lynchings and slavery, exactly what Lynn was talking about, and they're now saying that that is what's going on in the African American community. And it's important that you keep that in mind because a lot of people buy into that. And I thought it would be interesting to share a little bit of my story. So I identify myself as Christian, which I know is kind of weird being in this movement, and I never really thought about it until I was having a conversation, one of those parties where you go and they want you to buy into something. So I'm having this conversation with this guy, and it was a religious conversation at first. And then he asked me, what did I do? And at the time I was working for Planned Parenthood. I'm like, yeah, I'm an educator for Planned Parenthood. Kids call me the sex lady. And his demeanor completely changed. And it was at that moment that I realized, wow, people don't really like what I do. So then I began to question myself a little bit, not a lot. But to the point where I actually took it to my pastor and asked him what he thought about what I did. And he was like, well, you know, people need to be everywhere in every field. And I'm like, okay, that works for me. And as time went on and I started getting more involved in the abortion side of this field, I started to question myself again. And so now I go back to my pastor and I'm like, hey, you know, are you sure you really meant what you said? And see, he still stood behind me. And then it became the abortion access now wants me to come work for them. You still feel that same way? And he does. So I was always scared to kind of talk to my friends about it, who are all African Americans, and I decided to bring that up in a conversation one day. How do you guys really feel about what it is that I do? I mean, at first it was, you know, talking to kids about sex, no big deal. Well, to us, I know it's no big deal. But now I'm actually going into abortion clinics and building relationships and getting people to properly refer people to abortions. So how do you feel about it now? And to my surprise, I found out that several of my friends had actually paid for abortions. I'm like, wow, that was awesome. I mean, I loved it. But I never expected that because we all identify, we all go to church together and identify under the same, you know, religious branch. But I mean, and that's true within the African American community. Religion is intertwined a lot into our community. So it's easy for the pro-lifers to come in and use that and intertwine a little bit of our history with it as well and get us to jump ship and jump on their side. However, when you look at statistics, who's having the most abortions? African American women. But we are hush-hush about it. So I was doing a training last year, and this particular training is actually integrating miscarriage care into offices. And one of the ladies, the nurses that works in this, she was all for the miscarriage management being, and if you don't know, but miscarriage management in the office is actually the same as doing an elective abortion. She was all for this. She was, you know, loving it, and we do a lot of values clarification in this training. And throughout this training, she shared that she had 5 children, and then at one point, she apologized to us because she had had 2 abortions. Yeah, why do you owe me an apology? And this lady happened to be African American. And so I had to take the time to step aside with her and tell her she was still a good woman. You have 5 kids at home. What would life be like if you had had those other 2? Totally different, right? So coming into the Black community and talking about this, I thought until probably 24 hours ago, it was really no big deal because I'm Black. I guess it is no big deal. I can talk to my friends and tell them, you guys are considered privileged, and it is our job to go out and do the fight for everyone else. But then when I look around the room at the movement, and not just in this room, the movement for years and years and years of history, who is involved in the movement? White women. And I never thought about, well, white women can't just walk into the Black community and say, we need you guys, you're the ones, and blah, 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 blah. And someone brought it to my attention yesterday that, yeah, because then they become tokens. So then what do we do? And this is the question that I'm asking you, because we need Black people in this movement, and not just Black people, women of color. We are always the ones that are targeted out for everything, no matter if it's, you know, the birth control issue all the way to the abortion issue and every other health disparity that Tommy named. And it does kind of take an offense because, oh, here's another white lady coming to save the day type thing. And I hadn't really thought about that until yesterday. So for the women of color that are in the room, I encourage you to go back and have those round table talks with your friends. Because as a lot of women, what I'm learning is because Roe v. Wade is still here and in effect, so people think, they think there's no problem. And so as I talk to my friends, and I'm like, you guys don't really know how close we are to Roe v. Wade being gone. Yeah, it's still on the books, but they're like constricting us. And as a privileged, I'm okay to admit, I'm a privileged African-American woman. If I needed to have an abortion, I could come up with the funds and the transportation or whatever. But those are not the women that we're fighting for. It's the women that can't do that. And to get your friends or the people in your circle to realize that it's those women that we're fighting for. They don't have the transportation. They have 5 kids at home. How can I take time away to travel to Dallas or Kansas or whatever, and I have 5 kids at home? A lot of these women are single. So these are the things that we need to take into account. And also, so not just black women have black friends, but a lot of you in here have black friends. And as of having that friend relationship, you already have that partnership. And it sounds better coming from you than just this white woman coming in to save the day. So I encourage you to have those roundtable discussions with your friends and make them aware that this is an us issue, a woman issue. We need to work better at normalizing everything and not just putting it in this box, because that's what happens in the African American community. I didn't get any of this stuff growing up. I freaked out when I got discharged. What the hell is this stuff in my underwear? But nobody taught me that. And so until we begin to normalize this conversation among our friends, and you know, some of my friends may not want to be around me, but that's fine, because this is what I'm about. And that's what we have to do in all communities of color, is make it normal to talk about it and talk about what the other side is doing. They are taking advantage of us, and they're doing a damn good job of it. Mm-hmm. So I just encourage you to talk about that, and not only just talking about normalizing it, but also looking at the other side. So as a black woman, when I walk into a clinic, what am I going to see? I've learned in the last 24 hours that there is a state that has all African American providers, which I think is awesome. But that's also another thing. How awesome would it be as a black woman to walk into a clinic and see a black doctor? So that's a whole nother level of recruitment. So people that are going into the medical field and talking to them, why don't they think about this? Because it's not on their radar. It's not on their radar. And it's our job to put it on their radar. Thank you. Mm-hmm.